Now it's time to talk about Aviva, Ireland's largest insurer. They're marking the 10-year anniversary of the official opening of the Aviva Stadium and its proud long-term sponsorship of the iconic venue. To celebrate this milestone, Aviva are paying tribute to some of the most iconic sporting moments in the last decade. Feel free to join in. You can follow Aviva Ireland on Instagram and Twitter and share your favourite Aviva Stadium memories using the hashtag #SafeToDream. We've been running a poll all week for rugby's greatest moments. Yesterday, the quarter-final results, Robbie Henshaw, his try against England in 2015, romped home against Leinster Saracens from 2018. 65-35 was the score on that one. Ryan Crotty's try against Ireland, 56%, beat Issa Nasewa's try versus Leicester, 44%. That was yesterday. Today, the polls are live. Jacob Stockdale's try against New Zealand in 2018 is up against Jamie Heaslip's World Try of the Year against Italy, and that poll is live as we speak. Jacob Stockdale is going to be on the show tomorrow, and we have two Brian O'Driscoll moments up against each other. His record-breaking try in 2011, that was the record-breaking Six Nations try, versus the farewell against Italy in 2014. Brian, this is like having to ask you which is your favourite child. Which of these memories is your favourite?
Sophie's choice. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's easy for me. Of course, it's nice to pick up a record, but no, the memories from that 2014 game, having my little girl out on the pitch afterwards, the manner in which we set ourselves up for a title the following week, and we put in a really good performance. So yeah, I think I look back on that, and that's definitely one that kind of stands out immediately. It's weird that I probably have better memories in Lansdowne Road and in Croke Park than I do in the Aviva. Yeah, there's some one-offers like that, but I was running back through them. Grand Slam denial of England in 2011. The New Zealand game, the Ryan Crotty. By the way, I can't believe who's voted for Ryan Crotty's try ahead of Issa Nasewa's. What's that about?
56% of people. I think it's about it's supposed to be this important moment for. You tell us, actually, right? Did that change?
Well, you want me to turn it to tears? What is it, 8:45? No. Do you know what? You talk about atmospheres. That was definitely one of the best atmospheres. And you can't rewrite history because of 3 minutes at the end. That was an insane atmosphere, that whole game. And I got to take it in, obviously, on the pitch for 55 minutes. And then I got concussed, so I was in the dressing room and I was trying to pass time as quickly as I could, and then I came back out again. But there's no doubt the atmosphere that day was sensation. It was electric, and then it just was killed by one moment. And people talk about leaving the stadium that day with eerie silence, no one talking to one another. Well, that's certainly how it felt in the dressing room. And it was a steep learning curve, a bit harsher for some of us that never got the chance to then, put that right next time out. But it was as loud as I remember the Aviva being, that's for sure.
The 2011 game that is one of the moments, that try, we hammer England in that game and they're going for a Grand Slam. That was a really weird Six Nations for us, where France had beaten us at home and we'd lost against Wales away. They'd taken a quick throw in that they weren't supposed to, and then kind of needed a big performance from Ireland, but absolutely dominated this England team who were supposed to be good enough to win a Grand Slam in a World Cup year. Yeah,
it was. I remember it being a big performance. I remember it was a real intensity to our performance. And anytime a team's coming over to Dublin for a Grand Slam game, it's the last thing you want to hand over to anyone at home, and particularly England. So there's no shortage of motivation to get yourself right for a performance, and it felt like it was probably a better outcome on the course of that Six Nations because of how it culminated. But to lose 2 games and have to put in a huge performance against England to stop yourself from losing 3 of 5 is not where you want to be. Certainly not where that team wanted to be going into a World Cup as well. But it was a little bit of a shot in the arm with the knowledge that we'd be going down to New Zealand later on in the year, and there's a little bit of confidence derived from it. But it was. I think the Irish crowd, nothing's changed. People still love to beat England, and people still love to deny England success. And I don't know, you'll be another 800 years trying to change that mindset. But it's exciting playing well against the likes of England, because more often than not they're one of the best teams in the world. And it's, if you can park the history bit, I think it's, that you have to really excel in your performance if you are to beat them, be at home or away. And I think that's the thrill that players get. And then you feed off the public's perception as how important it is to beat England as well, and you enjoy the adulation that comes from that. But it's more about beating better teams or very good teams.
In terms of losing to England, are they then the worst team to lose to as well?
No.
Right.
No, it's it's hard. Like I look back to other, I have another great memory where we lost to England, where talk about going out with my daughter in my final game the day she was born. So, that it was the quickest 80 minutes I've ever played, and I was kind of floating around the place, and I couldn't have cared less that we'd lost against England in a Six Nations game. But I don't think that they're the most difficult to lose to. I think there's been lots of niggle with Wales for a number of years via the Gats the way he felt he was treated in Ireland with with being kicked to touch for Eddie, and that dragged on for a number of years. So I think there was always a nice bit of niggle between ourselves and Wales. And for me, England, you look at the Lions tours. I've
bit of an issue with the line there. We'll come back to that. Yeah, we'll dial Brian back there and make sure that the Skype line is good. I mean, the Welsh. Who'd have thunk that it is actually the Welsh that are the worst to lose to? There's nothing worse than being in Cardiff when Wales have won and you're Irish. There's nothing worse. In sport, it is the worst place. They're the worst winners. They are the worst winners.
Well, our last sporting memory as a rugby nation was beating Wales in the Aviva Stadium. Let's not forget. So what a happy memory to leave the pre-social distancing world.
To wrap it up. We're all good.
Yeah, absolutely. What a way to leave it. It was a real pandering to you there, Ger, to suggest that Wales are the worst team to lose to.
Look, we all know it. I mean, are you... Surely you agree with this?
I've got a particular. What's the opposite of a soft spot? I got a particular hard spot for England, I think, at times. But I've never really truly experienced the Welsh fans in Cardiff.
Yeah.
So that is a big factor, I think, in your view, that it's the toughest atmosphere in which to be a losing Irish rugby supporter in.
Yeah, so Brian is back with us. I was fully agreeing with the Welsh are the worst. They're the worst winners. There's nothing worse than being in Cardiff after Wales have won a match and you're an Irish rugby fan.
Well, like, it's different that we're not out in the streets, but I do think just because of the history and I think Gats drove it into his players as well, that Ireland was the big game, and Sam Warburton talked about it a while ago in his column, that all the perceived animosity between Wales and England was nothing on what they felt when they came over and played us, or when we played them in Cardiff. So I think the feeling was probably mutual. We had plenty of big games against them as well, and they probably got the better of us in the bigger games. Grand Slam in 2005. They nearly got it done against us in 2009. They beat us in the quarterfinal of the World Cup in 2011. So there's some pretty big moments in clutch games, and thankfully we did get one up on them in 2009. But I definitely felt as though it was probably a little bit more difficult to stomach against Wales. But listen, losing to Italy for the first time in my 15 years, that wasn't an easy game to take. I think we all think that we're superb winners and we're humble winners, but I think everyone will have something negative to say about us as much as we might about anyone else, about the lack of humility in victory.
Yeah, the Welsh aren't our biggest fans, it turns out, either. They think the same about us. I wanted to ask you about some of the big stories that have happened over the last while. The IRFU gave a press briefing last weekend where they talked about their finances and just the difficult state that the game is going to be in. Eddie O'Sullivan went public yesterday saying the players are going to have to accept pay cuts as well. Now, they already have, so it's a difficult enough scenario for the players to find themselves in at the moment when they don't have any certainty about how many games they're going to play this year or what their professional life is going to look like for the next couple of years. I wanted just to get your sense of how involved the players need to be as a players' body, both locally and especially globally, about the conversations that are happening about a new rugby calendar and the potential that we're going to have a globalised rugby calendar. I would have thought the players' voice is absolutely vital right now while this is being shaped.
No, it absolutely is. And without giving too much away, I'm part of that International Rugby Players Board, the overall body that's an umbrella to all the different unions. So there's lots of conversations going on behind the scenes, and it seems to be moving week by week, because we're waiting ultimately on government approval to be able to go back and train and play and so on. But yet you have to get the timing right to make sure there's no false start. And I think that's a big issue, is that particularly in England, the Premiership, they can't afford a false start where they take players off furlough and then bring them back training, pay them full whack, and then all of a sudden they find they're not going to get to play games. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with the broadcast rights, whether that money's been paid or not. I've heard conflicting views. I believe BT have paid it, but that hasn't been documented in some articles. So it's a really tricky one, and it's in a precarious place at the moment, where if it does go on much longer, we are running out of runway, and it's inevitable, irrespective of what the players say from from their needs point of view, from a monetary and a financial point of view, the unions are going to have their hands tied, because you read the monies that they've sold out from Newlands Cross, the CVC money that's coming in. So much of that is just literally going to be written off on the back of their losses. So it's a pretty dangerous place at the moment. And as much as you want player power, you've got to be understanding as well of the circumstances that all the different unions and clubs find themselves in.
It does feel like there are conversations happening at a much more in-depth level than would have even been the case 12 months ago, when a global calendar was something that we could maybe aspire to in a decade or so. It looks like it might be a realistic possibility for 2022 and potentially even 2021. Unlikely maybe for 2021, but 2022, where the Six Nations gets pushed back a month. My big question is always, how many games should a player play over the course of a year? And if we could all agree that players are going to be a fully fit player, assuming a set number or a target number of games, then you can work back where those games are played, how many international games, how many club games, what tournaments they play. And it seems like there's a kind of a consensus growing that about 30 games a year, 3 weeks on, a week off for a 10-month season, roughly, would be about the right number to aim at for professional rugby players now. Is that fair?
I think you can look at this a couple of different ways. I think you put that back to the player, and whether they're willing to play more games, for club and country, to receive the financial reward from that. And many players will say they are. You look at the players that have gone from the Southern Hemisphere, from Super Rugby or from Rugby Championship, and don't do holidays. They just go a full cycle of rugby. You've seen so many South Africans that have come up and played rugby in Europe that literally just appear to never get a break, other than maybe the odd injury here or there, that they're just playing consecutively. So some players are willing to do that. Some players' bodies are able for that. Others absolutely have to limit themselves to playing 25, 30 games a year. And you have to remember too, 25, 30 games a year isn't to be shrugged at, but you have to take into account the likely injuries that you're going to pick up, depending on your physical makeup, depending on your age profile. So in a perfect world of targeting 30 games a year, how often will you actually get to do that? Probably not very often. So for me personally, I was kind of in and around the 25 game mark. But that was to do with the international game taking precedence over everything else. I played Europe, I played international, and by the time you totted up eight to 10 internationals, and then your main European games, your main interprovincial games, that was, you're 25, and I got lots of slagging for never being in Rodney Parade. I was never putting any, I was never complaining that I wasn't on that flight over there, because I knew that there was a longer game to be played, bigger games to be played at the back end of my career as well. And I genuinely believe, having stayed in Ireland and played, less games on a consecutive basis, that I managed to get to 35. And I think that's where the likes of Johnny Sexton are reaping the rewards as well now.
I guess I'm kind of constantly comparing to the NFL and their players' union, who kind of restrict the amount of contact hours and full contact sessions you have. You can train in pads, you can train with no pads, you can't have any contact whatsoever with the organisation. It's obviously at an extreme end, but I wonder if we're getting to a point now where in the new calendar there will be a limited number of full contact training sessions that players are allowed to have, and that gets totted up on an app and it gets measured and it's independently audited, so that we do actually have a long-term sense of player safety for everybody who aren't just the top ranked players, but that actually, you look after and think about what the middle age is going to be like for a middle tier player who doesn't have access to the international side and isn't being carefully managed through this.
I have to say, I think it's kind of Neanderthal in the thinking of still going hard at one another a couple of times a week before you play a game on a Saturday. Everything now has to be weekend focused, and you start on when your game is on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and you work backwards and you plan out your week. And other than, maybe a 10-minute physical session, and it obviously depended as well at different times of the season. The longer you go in the season, the less need it is to do that, because the body's hardened. Maybe a little bit more of it, particularly in pre-season and then in the early weeks of the season. But I think you're able to pull back on all of that contact stuff, because what's the point of going hard at one another but then losing a body or two bodies on the basis of doing too much physical contact at training that you're going to miss out on a Saturday? Under Michael Cheika, we did so much simulation work, so much body height, and then that 5 or 10 minute big impact where you went full bore. And then, you got to the end of that and you knew that was it for the rest of the week. And then you change your mindset to making sure that body height is there for the rest of the week, but yet you preserve your body for the impacts that are coming at the weekend. And I think that has to be the smart play from coaches now. I think, you look back to the Leicesters of the world back in the 2000s, where they talked about, massive digging sessions on a Thursday afternoon. That's all well and good, but the game has changed over the last 10 or 15 years. And the impacts and the collisions do not allow you to go at one another during the week and then again at the weekend and perform at 100%. That's the reality of it. And the psyche has to change from a coach's perspective. And I think that's where strength and conditioning coaches come into their own and pay for themselves, where they have the power to get into their coach's ear and go, you cannot run my players ragged and expect them to deliver on a Saturday.
Because the previous concern about the global season was that there were going to be too many games, and the players were fairly strong about, look, this all needs to be managed properly. Does there need to be some kind of centralised reporting system where the individual countries, players' unions are asking the players to self-report, going, we are doing too much physical stuff here, and it's ultimately going to cost me a couple of years at the end of my career and a couple of years of earning potential?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say about the players is they weren't worried about the amount of games. It was the intensity of consecutive international games was the issue, was one of the main stumbling blocks. And there was talk of 5 consecutive high-end international games in that Nations Championship, where, if you were playing an England, say an Argentina, South Africa, New Zealand, Japan, and maybe a Six Nations team in 5 consecutive weeks, there's no way you can put out the same team, not even close to it. You look at the players that we lose over the course of 7 weeks during Six Nations, and the team you start with versus the one you end with more often than not is vastly different, and that has 2 bye weeks. So 5 consecutive games was the big issue for players, and I think that was what they put their hand up and said that you player welfare. That's what we talk about with player welfare. But I do think we need to pull all the information together. It's difficult to have a generic piece for everyone to work off, because everyone's trying to get an edge on one another. Everyone has their own IP of wanting to hold on to their data and use it as best they possibly can, because certainly the best teams in the world feel as though they've got superior fitness coaches, superior techniques, and they don't want to hand that sort of information out to other sides to allow them to catch up with them. So it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg there, where you're looking to look after players, but then unions backing themselves with the quality that they have at their disposal to be able to keep an edge on everybody else internationally.
In principle, is the idea of the Six Nations moving back a month a good idea or a bad idea, or is it something that the players will actually welcome?
I don't know. I'm split on this one as well, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there's something very unique and special about Six Nations, that it's an intangible, where the weather doesn't have to be great, the rugby doesn't even have to be great, but the cities are great, the history's great, the camaraderie's great, sometimes the weekend is secondary to, or the game is secondary to your weekend, but yet it can really elevate your mood, or it can you go and put your arm around a supporter from the opposite country, and you go and have a night out with them after. That sort of stuff is so unique, and if you could bottle that, and Sanzar certainly wish that they could bottle that. It's something that they've tried to replicate with no joy. So I'm reticent to be changing that, because it's such a great product. That said, a month later, will it impact massively? Probably not. Slightly better weather at the other end means better rugby, better spectacle. So there's an upside to that as well. But I think you just have to be very careful that you don't change things too much, because it's the cash cow for the Northern Hemisphere teams, no doubt.
And what would be your view on the Heineken Cup then, Brian? Because if the idea of a Club World Cup is to go to the next phase and it is to become a reality, that is the obvious candidate for something to fall by the wayside.
Yeah, but I don't think you can go Club World Cup every year. The expectation on the travel of that, I think potentially what they're looking at is in a cycle of 4 to do a Club World Cup, and I think there'd be an appetite for that as well. But yeah, when you talk about player welfare as well as about air miles too, and that's what makes the Rugby Championship so difficult at times, because the amount of time that first of all, the Super Rugby teams having to go and play down in New Zealand, Australia, and Argentina, all coming from South Africa, and then go again with Rugby Championship. That travel takes its toll, and I think you have to be conscious of that. When you're moving even further from the Northern Hemisphere to the Southern Hemisphere. So I think if that Club World Championship does come into focus, I think it'll be integrated into a 4-year cycle, rather than seen as an every year competition.
Andrew Mertens was on, Keith Wood's State of the Union himself and Michael Cheika were on, and Mertens' idea was that Super Rugby should play in its own time zone, so you could kind of expand up towards Japan and maybe have a team in Singapore, but that ultimately South Africa will become part of the European bloc, because the time zone makes far more sense. Everybody can watch games in the afternoon or the evenings, and ultimately then they end up becoming part of the Six Nations and part of the European rugby competitions. It didn't exist before. That doesn't mean it couldn't exist in the future. What would your immediate kind of gut reaction be to South Africa joining the Six Nations or Seven Nations and having a Super Rugby team based in Barcelona or something?
Yeah, I feel split on so many of these things, but I think if you look at the way the world is modernizing itself, you can't be stuck in your old ways as well. I think you've got to have an ability to adjust and maneuver with the times. And when you look at a powerhouse like South Africa coming and joining the Six Nations, could they do anything but enhance it? I don't think so. I think they would be a brilliant addition, because of they're 3-time World Cup winner. They're consistently eating at the top table. So I think that they would be a really good addition. I think it's a smart play. You think about the travel and the time zones, the movement of time zones for those South African players. It must be a nightmare. Whereas you look at how easy it is now for the Irish team to go down and play in the Pro 14 against the Cheetahs. It's a 2-hour. It was a 1-hour time difference at the moment, I think. So that does make sense, and
it feels as though it might be inevitable that it's going to go that way. Also, South Africa are playing it clever and realizing the strength of Six Nations, and if they can, they're sticking their toe in the water with the Pro 14 with a couple of their teams there now, and if they can maneuver their Super Rugby franchises and subsequently their international setup, I think that will be a smart play, because as I mentioned before, that's where the money is in Northern Hemisphere rugby for sure.
This all felt pie in the sky 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, 3 months ago, 6 months ago. We were having these conversations and everybody thought it was like, why are you wasting your time? But for whatever reason in the last couple of weeks, it has begun to feel very realistic that the whole global game is up for grabs, and that if a wise vision is put forward and sold to everybody at the same time as a rising tide that might just save Australian rugby, that might just give New Zealand the opportunity to have their best players stay in New Zealand, that might give South Africa a future pathway. It feels like we might be on the verge of something big and hopeful. I realise it's a really difficult time for the sport, and to be even talking like that seems a bit strange, but are you hopeful for the future of the game at the moment?
Yeah, I am hopeful. Do you know what? CBC, staying interested in Pro 14 and Six Nations, I think that says an awful lot. They're no fools, and if they felt as though the game was in huge trouble, they would have exited, taken this opportunity to get out when they could. So I do feel as though it'll recover. We have to be patient, but we also have to be hungry to get back. We're not going to get crowds into stadia for some time until a vaccine comes, by the looks of things, but we need to get live rugby back. I know the Bundesliga, was strange viewing first week, but that will become a new norm very quickly, and we'll get over that. And then when we are able to get back into full stadia, and proper normality resumes, I think it'll feel as though we were never gone away from that. So I'm positive in that. I think never put a good crisis to waste is definitely what World Rugby looks as though they're doing. They're taking this opportunity to shape a conversation that was being had before that, and it's an opportunity to do what all the relevant parties, all the relevant shareholders really want to do, and have that global calendar. I think it's also, we haven't really talked about it, part of having the global calendar is to make sure that when you come to a World Cup year, that everyone has an equal opportunity. And it does feel at times that some of the Northern Hemisphere teams are a little bit undercooked by just coming into their season, whereas the Southern Hemisphere teams, have had 6 months. They've delayed their international players going back to the Super Rugby. Then they play their Rugby Championship, a condensed version, and then they're ready to get into it. And they're kind of their peak condition 6 or 7 months into their season. It feels sometimes, and we've been caught out in 2007, no doubt, that we were massively undercooked. So I think getting the global calendar makes it a bit more of a level playing field. I'm not saying that Northern Hemisphere teams would have won more World Cups if it was different, not that at all, but I do think there's sometimes you get caught behind the 8 ball with not getting your preparation right, and there will be no excuses for that if you do a global calendar and everyone's dealing with the same circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. Your golf game's getting dusted off. Is that the right phrase?
Yeah, I got one outing last week. I played with Mal O'Kelly and Connor Ridge, Shane Lowry's manager. So yeah, it was good fun, lovely, beautiful day. Drove the ball well, but if my driving goes, I'm absolutely dead. So I'm still tortured on my short game, on my pitching game, I should say.
It feels like a little bit of normality returning to life all around the place.
Yeah, I think it is. I think even with this plan that's coming out over the coming months, it'll feel slow, but I think we're all resigned to the fact that we're going to be here for the summer for the most part. Some people will have holidays booked. I've got holidays booked myself for August. I cannot see how that can transpire. But yes, you hold out hope, or it's staycation time. So listen, what can you do? We've got a family house down in Wexford, and the WhatsApp group has been red hot with trying to book weeks for it. So I've never known it like that before. It can sit idly at times, but on this occasion, people looking to book 2 weeks in advance, and then angry faces emojis coming in, going, no, there's no 2 weeks to be booked. It's a week for every household. So, listen, it's coming back a little bit slowly but surely, but we've a long way to go to proper normality, I think.
When the sun shines, it's a great little country. Sure, where else would you rather be?
It is, and you know, I was up early this morning. We've a new dog, and I'm down for a walk down the park. And geez, it's easy to get out when you're in a t-shirt and shorts. Little trickier if this had happened kind of September, October coming into the winter. So we are lucky from that point of view, and the weather has made a massive difference to the overall psyche of people, and certainly us in this house, where we're not at each other, because you can gladly get outside and go for a stroll and enjoy the sunshine. So yeah, you should be. I suppose it's difficult to see the upsides, but there are a few.
Definitely. Right, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us. Stay safe.
Cheers, guys. To chat. Bye.
I'm just giving us some thoughts this morning here at 11 minutes past 9. Votes are still open in our Aviva Greatest Rugby Moments poll. Semi-finals tomorrow and Thursday, the final from Friday morning. We've got a feature-length interview with Tyler Hamilton coming up next this morning here on OTB AM. If you've missed anything so far this morning, you can subscribe to the OTB AM podcast stream and get your 2-hour sports breakfast fix every morning. We timestamp it so you can flick through for whatever bits you want. We're back talking Lance next with Tyler Hamilton, a former pro cyclist, teammate of Lance Armstrong and author of The Secret Race.
OTB AM.